Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Sarah Egan. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the Assistant Director of School and Teaching Programs at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. I'm absolutely delighted to see all of your faces today, and so glad that you were able to join us for this virtual kickoff of our Thinking Through Art Impact Study. We are very excited to welcome you virtually to the Gardner to celebrate this new project, as well as our relationship with Boston Public Schools. And we have a number of those folks joining us today too. I want to start by recognizing some of the incredible sponsors of Thinking Through Art who make projects like this possible. So our lead sponsor of the Thinking Through Art program is the Vertex Foundation, and additional support is generously provided by the Rowland Foundation, the Yawkey Foundation, the Becker Foundation, Liberty Mutual Foundation, Grow at Annenberg, the Hamilton Company Charitable Foundation, Thomas Anthony Pappas Charitable Foundation, and Janet Burke Mann Foundation. The museum also receives operating support from the Massachusetts Cultural Council, which is supported by the state of Massachusetts and the National Endowment for the Arts. Thank you to all of those supporters for this important work. So as we get started, just a couple of things to cover. First, that the Gardner Museum is an inclusive place that welcomes everybody. We thank you in advance for participating and for maintaining a respectful environment without harassment or any form of discrimination. Please be sure to take care of yourself during this program and take care of each other during our time together. And please note that we are recording this program. If you have any questions or technical difficulties, you can go ahead and use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen and we can help to support you. We also have a live transcript available during the program at the bottom of the screen. And you can also turn that off if you don't want to see it. We encourage you to use the chat actively. I see some people already in there, and just be courteous as you're sharing your ideas and sharing questions and responses for all of our speakers this evening. There will be an opportunity for questions and responses towards the end of our program, but you can continue to put those in the chat as we go. Housekeeping here. So tonight, we have the pleasure of hearing from a number of people that are involved in the Thinking Through Art Impact Study. And to kick us off today, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Peggy Fogelman, who is the director of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. And I will turn it over to you, Peggy.
Thanks so much, Sarah. And thank you all for being here. It's nice to see some familiar faces on this Zoom, like Philip Yenuin, who we've known here at the Gardner for a very long time. So Thinking Through Art has had a really powerful impact on students for the last 5 years, and it builds on over 30 years of Gardner partnerships with the Boston Public Schools. And you're going to hear much more about the program and also get a taste of what students experience in this program. We're really excited about this study. I hope you're going to be as excited as we are. We hope to be able to demonstrate the unique power of art and museums to contribute to public education. As you know, it's often very difficult to quantify the really significant impact that the arts have on student learning and on skills that are not easily quantifiable, but that are inspired by the habits of mind that that characterize artistic endeavor, such as critical thinking and empathy and cultural competency. So we want to leverage our resources as a museum and as an exceptional collection to support as many Boston Public School teachers and students as we possibly can. And this is part of our values, and particularly our goal of being a vibrant resource for our communities. And Boston Public Schools is a community that's really critical to the city and to our museum. It's an exciting moment for the museum, and I hope you'll all come visit. We are starting up our in-person programs again, such as our open studio, our concerts, our public panels and discussions, and we just opened a new exhibition of the work of Zenelli Maholi, who is a South African visual artist dedicated to making visible those who society would seek to marginalize and erase, namely the LGBTQIA+ community of South Africa and beyond. So I hope that you will all have a chance to come visit during the run of the exhibition. We really look forward to continued conversation with all of you as this study progresses, and we can't wait to share the findings as they emerge throughout this process. But in the meantime, we're very grateful for your participation and support. And with that, I think that I am turning it over to Michelle. Is that correct? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Peggy. Hello, everyone. Likewise, it's great to see many familiar faces, many new faces. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Michelle Growe. I'm the Esther Stiles Eastman Curator of Education at the Gardner, and we're thrilled that you're joining us tonight. I think if the next slide I wanted to use, yep, great. So one of the quotes that we have from Isabella Stewart Gardner is that she left the museum for the education and enjoyment of the public forever. This is a phrase that the education department, as well as many others, uses as a guidepost, as something that really gives us direction and purpose for a lot of our work. Education clearly and learning, as well as really strong and effective teaching. Empathetic teaching is something that's near and dear to many of our hearts. It's also, it's great to be reminded that enjoyment is something that's a part of learning and something that we try to infuse in a lot of the work that we have as well. The education department at the museum started in around 1992, and we have had a lot of different projects that we've done with K through 12 programming and with Boston Public Schools. One of our bigger projects was from 2003 to 2007, where we were looking at the impact of our then school partnership program and had the VTS co-founders, Abigail Housen and Philip Yanowin. Hi, Philip, it's great to see you, as advisors for that project, where we were looking at the impact of critical thinking skills. And that project then spurred many more case studies and other types of evaluation and research that we've continued to do since then, taking a closer look with different age levels of students, getting a better understanding of what the learning and the progress that happens with teachers and their training looks like over time, as well as how we can be more culturally responsive, not just to the audiences and the students and teachers that we're working with, how we can select imagery and bring together art and different experiences where students can see themselves reflected and also build that confidence in their communication and critical thinking, creativity. So all of the above. So all of those things are still big drivers for us at the museum. Thrilled that we are starting a thinking through art impact study in this one and working with the various partners that we have. And as Peggy said, really looking forward to studying and getting a sense of how we can capture and quantify what that type of learning looks like in both familiar as well as new ways. And so with that, I think I pass it back to you, Sarah, and thank you again to all of you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Peggy, and thank you, Michelle, for setting that context of the history of where this program is coming from. So I'm going to share a little bit more about the Thinking Through Art program, and then we'll get into the details of the study itself. So Thinking Through Art really recognizes that teachers are the levers of change, and we're glad to have a number of our teachers here today with us on the Zoom. So this program is a way to infuse student-centered, high-quality visual arts instruction throughout all of Boston Public Schools, regardless of what subject area or grade level teachers and students might be working within. Our goals for Thinking Through Art are that teachers, regardless of who they're teaching and what subjects they're teaching, are able to make their classrooms inclusive and really fun and exciting places where they have these rich conversations about visual art. We want them to use both their individual reflections as well as group reflections from teachers across the different schools and neighborhoods all around Boston to become better teachers and really connect with the educators that they want to be. We also want to develop students' capacities to decode visual art using evidence-based discourse and really building that critical thinking as well as the socio-emotional components that Michelle already started speaking to. Especially now when everyone has felt so isolated from all of the cultural organizations in the city of Boston. We're really dedicated as well to making sure that the Gardner Museum is a place where students feel a sense of connection and a sense of belonging, and know that it can be a place of learning and a respite and sanctuary for them, as well as for their teachers. So the Thinking Through Art program, as I said, prioritizes teachers. So we start with professional development. We offer intensive professional development for Boston Public School teachers, which they can get graduate credits for, as well as professional development points. So it really helps them to advance in their personal career goals. And it also develops the capacity across the district of building a cohort of teachers who are able to use visual art and able to really center their students' perspectives in this way. The teachers work with us throughout the whole school year for this program, both in-person workshops or virtual workshops, as well as through individual assignments with their classes. They lead conversations about art in the classroom and bring their students to visit the Gardner Museum twice during the year, virtually if need be, but hopefully exploring the galleries in person. In the classroom, teachers use a curriculum of visual art that we provide that shows them artwork from around the world and from eras and geographic regions that might be less familiar to students, as well as showing them images that will reflect the day-to-day lived reality of the students in the classroom in Boston. So students are really introduced to all of the ways that artists have used their media to tell their stories throughout time and across different spaces. Students receive family admission passes so they can continue to come and visit the museum on their own and bring their family and friends. And all of our teachers also get memberships. So we really want to create this unlimited access, removing all of those types of barriers between students and the museum. As Michelle described, we've always had a really rich impetus to research the impacts of our program and understand whether we are achieving our goals. So here you can see the elements of practice. We have a rich theoretical framework built on the work of Abigail Housen, whose family members are here, hello, as well as Philip Yenowin, good to see you, and a number of other thinkers and researchers and those in the education sphere. And then we bring together research as the third component of that triad to really understand how well we are achieving our goals. Through previous studies that Michelle mentioned, we've found that visual thinking strategies is a fantastic pedagogical methodology and professional development methodology to achieve our aims of increasing student skills while making them feel comfortable in the museum and improving teacher practice. Visual thinking strategies is based in research on how people think about art and is really a way for any facilitator, whether they have a background in art or not, to create opportunities for this kind of magic to happen. It was developed by a Harvard-trained cognitive psychologist, Abigail Housen, and the former director of education at the Museum of Modern Art, Philip Yenowin, and they came together to create this process for looking at art that really allows the learner's perspectives and prior knowledge and observations to be central. It's been used in museums, in schools, businesses, medical teams, really all different types of contexts around the world. And it helps the students or the learners to be the experts in the conversations, making them confident in their interpretations of art and able to share their ideas with each other. It's perfectly suited to work at the Gardner Museum, where students can find their place in the Gardner's installations and use Isabella Stewart Gardner's very unique idiosyncratic arrangements of art to find connections and comparisons and make their own personal meanings and connections with those pieces. It's also very fun. So we're going to actually have an opportunity here to have a visual thinking strategies discussion, because we want to give you a sense of that experience of what our students and teachers actually do either in the galleries or virtually when we are together. So one of the wonderful things about visual thinking strategies is that there are lots of right answers. So please don't be afraid of being wrong. Any perspectives are welcome as long as you can back your ideas up with evidence. So we have that combination of openness and flexibility, but also a lot of rigor and that idea of a cognitively demanding task. So I'll share in a moment an artwork that we'll be discussing. I won't share a lot of what I think or know about that artwork, but it's really up for us as a group to make meaning together and see in this particular moment, on this day and time, what can we understand about this piece? I'll ask a series of very structured questions and do some other facilitation moves along the way. And I welcome you to either respond in the chat or to use the little raised hand icon, because there's actually too many people on this call for me to see all of your faces at once, and I don't want to miss you. So you can use that little raised hand, and that way I'll be sure to see you. So without further ado, I'm going to put up a work of art. And first, let's all get present in this space. Let's take a couple of nice long deep breaths, a moment of silence, really take this time to look at this work of art and ask yourself the question, what's going on in this picture? So I too will be silent as we take that moment. Okay, what's going on in this picture? Who wants to start us off? Veronica, welcome. Please share.
I think it's a woman dancing.
Okay, so you see a figure that you're reading is female and thinking that they're engaged in the act of dance. What do you see that makes you say they could be responding to movement?
Well, one is the way the body posture. It's not something that we normally do. You know, the way that her hand is sticking out and the way she's holding up her skirt. Sorry, I'm also doing it along, but that's what we end up doing, huh? And then also the reason I concluded that was because of the background. There's the musicians, there's people like playing instruments in the background. So I assume that her body posture, in addition to that, indicates that she may be dancing.
Okay, so a couple of pieces of evidence here. One is the unusual position in which the dancer is holding their arms. And you even took that pose on yourself, which often we do in the galleries, and I invite you to do here as well, trying to put your arms into that pose, which gives you a sense of that, not a day-to-day motion, but maybe more what you would do if you were dancing. And then supporting that claim as well is that there are potentially musicians in the background providing that sound. Thank you. Okay, what more can we find, Perla?
I agree with Veronica that there is a woman dancing, but I'm going to add that this is probably an event where people are taking turns coming up to a center to dance, maybe to play music, but definitely to dance.
Okay, so perhaps this is an event of some sort where there are multiple people that will each rotate through this position of dancer. What do you see that makes you say that?
What do I see that makes me say that they're taking turns?
They're taking turns. Mm-hmm.
Because I see that one person is kind of in the center, that woman, and I'm looking at the other, I think, women in the back right, looking towards the woman and also moving. So I think they're also engaged in the same type of activity, but instead of being up and center dancing with her, they're kind of sitting back and giving her that space, but they're also dancing along.
Okay, so these people over on the right-hand side of the picture could be in a similar position, but at this particular moment, they're not the ones who are center stage. They're taking that seat and allowing their colleague to be the main dancer. But you can imagine them switching places. Mm-hmm. Thank you. What more can we find? I know many of us are very familiar with this artwork, so you can share any component that's standing out to you today. What more can we find? Chelsea.
Something that really strikes me about this is the shadows. Like, it makes me feel like it's at night, and it has a lot of energy too. So it's like, it's a late night, but it's an energetic night.
Okay, so the use of light and shadow is really creating an atmosphere for you, thinking about the time of day, thinking about the type of energy. What do you see that makes you say that the shadows create that sense of excitement or energy?
The shadow of what appears to be the shadow of the dancer like behind the dancer. Yeah, right there. Really creates this like central focus point to me that really like drives the energy. I don't know, it's just something about the way it's shaped and the way it's placed in the image makes it feel very exciting and energetic.
Okay, so the shadow here at the top central portion of the picture, which might be a projection of the shadow of the dancer here, is to you really standing out as a way to focus our attention, but also create a sense of, to use the word again, energy. There's something in the atmosphere there that the shadow is creating for you. Thank you. What more can we find, Melissa?
I completely agree. Today, I'm seeing that shadow so clearly. I don't know why. I've looked at this so many times and taught with this, but I'm noticing the shadow behind that main dancer. And I'm noticing how it really is that you can see her neck in it. You can see the arm, you can see the shoulder. And I never really thought of it as so perfectly connected to her body. And I just always saw it as this big kind of, I don't know, sandstorm of light and dark. But I really see it as just this, it just makes me realize how big she's appearing in that shadow, and how that shadow and her presence is really so overwhelming in that space right now for me.
Okay, so first, remarking on the experience of viewing this artwork across many different settings and how you're seeing different things in it today than maybe you have before. And previously viewing this shadow as maybe more diffuse, but now as an amplification of the dancer. You were noting that there's specific anatomical features that you can make out the way that they're projected into the shadow. So it's serving a little bit of a different purpose. And can you say more, what do you see that makes you say that it's making the dancer kind of loom larger for you than in the past?
I think because I always thought of it as the light source is coming from bottom, and it would just diffuse the whole body and against the wall and cast this big sort of darker shadow. But I never, in comparison to all of the other shadows of all of the other people, and of course they're closer to the wall, but they're so small in comparison to their, I mean, they're relative to their shadows on the wall. Whereas her shadow, and she doesn't look like she's that much further away from the wall as they are, but it just shows how big an energy and a presence that she really has. And maybe because she is the dancer, the focus. But for me today, it's just striking.
Thank you. So partially the comparison between this shadow of the central dancer and some of the other shadows of the other figures that are sitting closer to the wall. So there's a physical reason why that shadow might be smaller, but it sounds like it's also taking up some psychological space too, that the dramatic size difference there is making you have some associations with that central dancer. Thank you. And Mike, what more can we find?
So I'm always been intrigued by the orange on the left chair. Not stage right, but left if we're looking at it. And today I'm noticing the colors of the dancers in the wings as kind of balancing it, that orange, and wondering in my head, is that why the orange is there? That we have these few bright spots of really bright, vibrant colors, and the rest of it is much more either bright light, very white, or relatively dark. And so part of it is I'm wondering why the artist did it, and my current theory is perhaps to give us something else to look at in addition to the shadow, which I totally agree looms large.
Thank you. So we've talked about light and shadow, and now you're bringing in color as well. And that we've got these two areas where there's a bright color, what you're calling orange, and then the outfits over here on the opposite side of the picture, and noting that the rest of the image is more or less monochromatic of light lights and dark darks. So you're speculating that perhaps there could be that the artist's intention in creating these two different moments of color and balancing out the color on the right with this object on the left might explain its presence there. Am I understanding that correctly? Okay.
Perfect.
And what do you see that makes you say that that creates a sense of balance in the composition?
Well, given that the dancer is beautifully not dead center, but is the center of the picture, you then have this nice ratio of the color on the left and the color on the right, and one part is smaller and the other is bigger. And yet, if you look at those 1, 2, 3 pieces together, they form still a certain offset balance in my mind.
Okay, so we're not seeing exact symmetry or center. You were talking about how the dancer is off center, that there's a sense of balance and harmony without it being exactly proportional through this use of color. Thank you. What more can we find? What more can we find? Claire.
I think it's so delightful that so many people are noticing the shadow, because that was the thing that stood out to me immediately as well. And what it drew my eyes to was the scarf, because that's where the shadow for me gets sort of diffuse, is the points of the shadow that are, you know, the shadow of the scarf that's moving. And I just never looked really closely at it. But for me, that brings so much more of a sense of movement, like looking at the fabrics that aren't, that don't have this kind of solidness of some of the other fabrics that are in this painting. That one looks buoyant.
Are you looking under, like here under the arm?
Yeah.
Is that an area?
Yes.
So
And over her other shoulder too.
Over here as well. Okay.
Yeah.
So noticing what you're calling scarf or shawl, this piece of fabric that's around the torso of the dancer, and the way that it is sort of blurring into the background, and the way that the shadow too is diffuse in that same way, and comparing that with some other types of or depictions of fabric in other parts of the image that feel more solid. Can you say, what do you see that makes you say that there's other fabrics that have a different quality to them?
It's really just in contrast to her skirt that's absorbing all of the, or reflecting all of the light. It looks like it's made of a really heavy kind of fabric. It's very opaque and dense looking. It looks like it's a heavy skirt, and it's so clear, and all of its folds are so clearly rendered and articulated. And then in contrast, the scarf is almost ephemeral. It's like you don't feel like you could reach out and touch it. It's almost as immaterial as its shadow.
Okay, thank you. So comparing these two different moments in the work between this skirt and the shawl, and the way that there's visual weight in one, and then that sense of ephemerality in the other, weightlessness, and comparing the different textures and modes of depiction as well. Thank you. What more can we find? Veronica. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry that you think after 2 years of Zoom. The more I'm looking at it and people pointing out the colors, it almost seems like there's like this beautiful thing of white, 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 white across horizontal plane until you get to this pop of red. So it's almost like an arrow, like that's leading to that. When I think was it Claire was just talking about her skirt, and then I just started noticing my eyes drifting to the white of the shirts of the musicians, and then that red that just kind of comes up to the very right of the piece. And it, like I said, it almost looked like an arrow drawing your eye to that area.
Thank you. So building on Claire and Mike and some others as well, the way that the use of white helps our eye to move around the picture. And you were saying that it's almost directing you across the different shirts and then the skirt, and leading us to this more brightly colored area. Can you say, what do you see that makes you say that it resembles an arrow, or helps your eye move like an arrow?
Just the fact that it's like a horizontal plane across almost the the middle of the painting, and then she is vertical. So sorry, I don't know if you can see my hand, Sarah. So it's like kind of, you know, like that, like the horizontal shirts. And then obviously her dress is, or her skirt is bigger, but it just kind of draws to the vertical figure on the very right of the painting.
Okay, so we've got the horizontal bar of the arrow, and then this is almost like the pointed part of an arrow, for lack of terminology, that's then directing your eye to continue moving across the picture plane to this area that's more colorful all the way on the right.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank
Is
you.
there a word for that part of the arrow? The pointy part?
Someone maybe can help us in the chat. Is there a name for the pointy part of an arrow? Thank you. What more can we find? We have time for just, I think, 1 or 2 more comments on this one. Philip, what more can we find? You're muted.
I think it's interesting that despite her major tilt there and her uplifted arm and her grabbing onto the dress and things like that, sort of, if you look at her face, she looks like she's in some other zone. She looks so relaxed.
Okay, so you're seeing, we've talked about a lot of different contrasts here. You're seeing a contrast between the position of the body, and especially, again, these arms, and then an ease or a relaxation in the face. And what do you see that makes you say that their face looks more at rest?
Well, it's almost expressionless. It looks like her eyes might be closed, her mouth is closed, and it's sort of set in such a way that sort of, it seems like she's, it almost as if she were meditating instead of doing this pretty lively dance.
So almost a sense of serenity in the face here, looking at the different features and how they seem set in a relaxed mode. And again, the action and the movement of the body might make you expect something different on the face there. Thank you. What more can we find? Any final thoughts? No one wants to go after Philip Yanoin. I understand that completely. Thank you. Thank you all so much for looking together and pulling apart different aspects of this picture. It's such a different conversation than those I've had in the past, and I've led thousands of conversations about this artwork. And I just really appreciate that all of you are bringing your own particular lens today and the things that are interesting to you today to discuss about this piece. And it's just such a pleasure to talk about art together. So thank you all. Before we move on to what this all has to do with our study, I also want to debrief that experience a bit. So in this moment, you got to be the learner in a visual thinking strategies conversation. You got to experience what these students do when they come to the museum and see works like that in our galleries. So you can either share in the chat or again, raise your hand and share, what did you experience during that discussion? Either if you verbally participated or if you participated by listening. Perla, please.
I try to look at it from a different lens as from my newcomers who usually just tell me what's there. So I try to think, oh, let me give it more of a story. And then hearing all of your responses made me go, whoa, like talk about what's not, just naming what's there. Yet everything was backed with evidence. So I loved it. It was just different from all the other conversations that I've had.
Thank you. Yes, a lot of the folks that were participating in this conversation have vast experience looking at art, have perhaps made it their life's work. And so maybe this was different from what we can hear in our classrooms. But one thing that you just said that is really true across students' experience as well is that listening to other people's perceptions of an artwork always unlocks some new way of seeing or some detail that you hadn't noticed before, and that it's so rich to talk together as a group. I see that in the chat, people are talking about that too, just seeing things you didn't notice before, how much fun it is to look at art together, which is definitely something we need in our schools. I see Melissa noting that a lot of people were talking about mood and atmosphere, and that might tell us something about where we are just as human beings in this particular moment. And Chelsea's talking too about the experience of discussing art in this way makes it feel like a moment apart from day-to-day living. It feels like a mindfulness experience. It feels like a moment of really being present and pausing. We talked about that artwork for I think 20 minutes almost. I think it was between 15 and 20 minutes, which is a long time to spend on one thing, to really give it that moment to investigate together and to hear each other out. And that is such a rare experience for us. So I appreciate that too. And then people also noting how this looking together virtually is different from being in the galleries, so that we can see some things better and some things not as well. People talking about the specific ideas like the light, Kate pointing out feeling connected to the group and building that community, even though we're just together for a short amount of time, starting to get to know the ways that each person perceives the world around them and the way that we process the world. When we're talking about things, when we're talking about social-emotional learning, that's one of the key components that we're able to get insight into the ways that others make sense of their experiences and their observations and develop that type of empathy. So lots of great ideas here. I hope that you did have fun looking together. I think, yes, Amy's saying new ideas, even with an image we've seen before, people being curious, people connecting to each other. I hope that you've experienced some of that rigor and some of that joy that we hope to create for our students. So thank you so very much. Now that we have that fresh in our minds, we're going to talk more about what are these impacts that we're investigating in thinking through art. So now I have to go back to my notes. So we're going to hear more now from Mary Ellen Munley, who is an advocate for demonstrating impact and the public value of museums, and has done that across her career. She's among those who place museums and their work firmly in the public service sphere, and has conducted research demonstrating the Holocaust Museum's contribution to preparing teens for a lifetime of civic engagement, and is working on projects about the role of art museums in sparking creativity and contributing to the well-being of older adults. With us, she's guiding us in our investigation of the ways that the Gardner Museum's resources really contribute to advances in Boston Public Schools instruction and advances in student learning as well. So we are delighted to have her with us today. I'm going to turn it over to you, Mary Ellen.
All right. Hello, everyone. It's nice to be here with you. I'm just getting, there you go. It's nice to be with you. And as Sarah said, one of the things that I find really attractive about this particular program and then this study is that it is often the case that there are very limited resources in public schools and in urban schools. And it strikes me as rather, or it's always struck me as rather ironic that, you know, the cities within which these schools sit are just brimming with some of the most wonderful cultural and artistic resources in the world. And so it seems it's like it's upside down, right? You'd expect there to be a great advantage of being in a city if you're in a public school because of all of those magnificent resources. And what this Thinking Through Art program does, I think, it's been showing how when the resources of a museum are connected to the goals and needs of the school and the school system, something really important happens. And it's not just in the service of either of them that this is going on. And so you'll notice, and Sarah has the slide up there right now, that we're kind of framing this study in a large scope and looking really at this notion of what are the resources in a community that could be put to use in the public schools, and how does a place like a museum genuinely come through and say, we are as invested in the teaching and learning in our public schools as those in the public school system themselves, and as the families who have children in those systems. So we're investigating this program, which, as you can tell from your experiences, it sounds as if many of you have been working with it for a while, and from the demonstration that we just all shared, that there's something important here and something that we'd like to see more of in education. So can this Thinking Through Art program, the combination of the professional development for teachers, the classroom resources that are available in terms of images of art, and the method of instruction, that's sort of social learning, can they help the Boston Public Schools achieve its strategic goals, right? In terms of culturally responsive and equitable teaching, and in terms of the gains in the critical thinking and social emotional learning that the students are going to experience. I'll stop there for a second and just get a bit to the nitty gritty of things. If we look at the timeline, Sarah, this is going to, which is, I think, yeah, right. You don't have to look at the nitty gritty, those of you who are looking on, but just this is to sort of give you confidence that we know what we're doing and that it's going to take a while and that it'll go in phases. And that that's one of the strengths of the study, actually, is that we're not rushing it and we are allowed to take some time with it. So here we are, not in January, but in February, kicking it off. We've already been at work on this for 2.5 years. Part of that length is because of the pandemic, but it's given us quite a lot of time to think through and conceptualize both the design and the elements of the program. But what we're heading into and what we're kicking off tonight is that from February until May of this year, we're going to be pilot testing the instruments for information gathering and the procedures for information gathering. The real study will take place during next school year. And we're working with a wonderful group of teachers during this pilot time. And we're looking at the survey questions and instruments that we'll be using to learn more about, the students' feelings of belongingness in school and their sense of being listened to, some of those social emotional things. We'll get some of that information through survey. We'll get a lot of that information through the content analysis of videotapes. One of the methods will be videotaping classroom instruction. And we will look at it through two lenses. We'll look at it through the lens of what's happening in terms of the instruction and facilitation. And then we'll look at them also in terms of, and what's happening in terms of the interactions among the students and the kinds of ways that they are listening to and talking to and learning from each other. The other piece of this, of course, is something that's been done in other studies about visual thinking strategy. And that is, we will be asking students to produce a work, a sample of their work, which we are developing a prompt for that we hope will be able to sort of expose some of the thinking processes that they're using as they examine a work of art. And so getting those prompts right so that they really allow the students to express as fully what they're experiencing and what they're seeing and what sense they're making of the work of art will be able to come through. Past studies have looked at works of art, at student work, through a more limited lens than we're going to. And again, we're really working on what the prompt is going to be. And that's what the teachers are going to help us with during this pilot testing period. As you can imagine, there are a lot of technicalities and practicalities to videotaping inside the school and gathering the information and keeping it all safe and sound and protecting the privacy. And we're going to need many people, research assistants and teachers and principals to understand how to do that and how to do that well. And so those procedures we're also pilot testing during this second half of this school year. In the summer, the real program, that's the sort of treatment in our study, begins when the new class of Thinking Through Our teachers attend and participate in the Institute. And then it will be that group of teachers which we don't know what the number is at this moment, but it could be anywhere between around 60 or 70 teachers who in grades from kindergarten through 12th grade, and in teaching in a variety of different disciplines. That will be the cohort of teachers, all 60 of them, and then the students that they are working with that year. So it's a fairly large sample size, and it will be wonderful to have Claire around to help us guide the management of all of that data. And then we'll start off gathering information just to sort of get a benchmark at the beginning of the school year, both in terms of the teachers' performance in facilitating the looking and the students' demonstration of some of their critical thinking skills, right? And some of the ways that they behave in a group of fellow students who are looking at something together and learning together. We'll have a period of data analysis, obviously, and we're hoping that, and we're aiming toward being able to have the results of the study in September of 2023. So shall we go to the next slide, Joe? So what are we going to be looking for through these various ways of gathering information? In terms of the teachers, and this is language from Boston Public School, right? They are now, as part of their strategies, wanting to focus on culturally responsive and equitable instruction. Anyone who's been around VTS and experienced it knows that that's at the heart. That's one of the things that's at the heart of it. And we want to be able to see if we can't find that and demonstrate it. And demonstrate it in a way that is believable to the folks in the school system. So we're going to be looking at how the teacher facilitates the learning, so that she or he is in fact involving many of the students and facilitating their talking to one another. The rich group of art images is something that also hands the teachers a tool in terms of cultural diversity and ways for students to be able to find some personal connections. It's a very carefully curated set of images, and it's an invaluable resource for teachers to be able to work with. Clearly, we're all exceptionally interested in equality and equity and inclusion, and these images and art has always been one of the ways that we can become aware of that and interact with that part of life. And it's also, we find from many teachers that this is a method, once they get into it, where they become freer and more able to allow the students to take some of the authority in the learning process. And it's something that's valued across education. It's something that I think we've all noticed is not super prominent in the public schools. So all the more valuable that there are teachers who are getting that kind of capacity by working in the Thinking Through Art program. And making that shift, and we've heard from ones in the past, making that shift from, I'm the authority to, the students have something to say here, and I also have something to contribute to their learning. But so we're going to look at all those things in terms of teachers. That hasn't been done before. Most of the studies have looked at the students. And one of the things we're doing here, the studies have always looked at, are there any increases in critical thinking? In terms of the coding of some of the students' work, it was very careful in terms of what are some of the aspects of critical thinking. We've gone through a process, and the teachers are going to vet it for us, of really carefully identifying what are the specific things that Thinking Through Art does in relation to critical thinking. We think it's a stronger argument that that thinking through art, if you use it, is something that's going to help your students to focus on identifying information, finding things, observing, taking a while to do it, and drawing inferences, accepting multiple perspectives, and then absorbing all of those things and some kind of reasoning in a way that is noticeable to draw some kind of meaning out of it. So these very specific aspects of critical thinking is what we're going to be looking for. And the new feature is, again, looking at those social elements of learning. Does a student feel as if he or she can or is allowed to express themselves? Do they do it with confidence? We're finding that those are things that happen within TTA classrooms, and that students are learning from one another and seeing things that they wouldn't have seen on their own, and that it can accumulate into a sense of feeling like you're a valued member of that classroom. Or all of these are especially important, of course, because of the diversity of students in classrooms. We have students with varieties of languages, we have students with varieties of personal experiences. And so that sense of belonging and also that sense and confidence of being able to express yourself is something that's very important. And we are really going to be, looking hard to find good evidence and indication that that is in fact what is happening when teachers are using TTA. We've built in a couple of strengths to the study design that I thought it'd be nice to share with you tonight. And I think that's the next slide, Sarah. It really hones in and focuses on Boston Public School goals for teaching. I'll confess, when we wrote the first draft of the proposal, we had it framed a little bit more around, how could we show the impact of the program itself? And it felt a little bit, as we went along, a little bit too museum-centered in terms of where it would be helpful information or why we'd want it. So we went back, and with the help of some of the people in the school system, we have really honed in on elements and used language that is something that they understand and that they care about. We are going to have what's called a quasi-experimental design, which means that there will be the classrooms and the teachers who are in TTA this coming year. And in each of them, they will be paired with a control teacher and class in their own school. So if it's a 5th grade teacher at such and such school, there will be another 5th grade teacher at that school whose class and who herself will participate in this study. The principals are going to help us to get as close of a sort of commonality between the two teachers as possible and the classroom. So we'll be working on that. We're also going to do pre and post design, right? All the kinds of things that we're looking at and the instruments are going to be applied at the beginning of the school year and then again at the end of the school year, so that we can really look at change and have a better shot at being able to claim that, in fact, it was the thinking through art that is likely to have some contribution to that change that's being noticed. And the other thing that we're doing, which is a little bit radical in terms of social science research, I would say, is that we're not going to use exactly the same instrument or method of gathering information for every single student, because we are well aware that there is such variety in students' comfort with various languages, that students learn and express themselves in different ways, that some students have learning processes that require them to have special tools to be able to communicate. And we're going to create versions of our information gathering method tools that can adapt to those kinds of needs and that that students have. So it'll go everything from language translations to if there are students who really can't express themselves in writing, but they do better by talking, we'll get information from them by talking with them. There are students who use special assisted devices like sentence stems or technology. And if that's the way that the student expresses himself or herself, that's the way we're going to ask them to participate and to contribute to the study. So we're really working on making it as inclusive as possible. And as we mentioned, a couple of things that are kind of new to this is, again, recognizing that the centrality of empowering students as learners that is embedded in this and making that part of what we're investigating and studying. That other element of not just saying critical thinking, getting very specific about the particular aspects of critical thinking that this can do. We don't want to overpromise. We want to be able to demonstrate and be very clear. And then this notion of, equitable ways, not, as you know, standards in research are usually that it all has to be the same, right? That's the requirement. And we're saying, no, it doesn't. The requirement is that everybody has to be able to express themselves and give the information as best they can. And so that's something that we're fascinated to see exactly how it's going to play out and how it will be received. And then back to the original point, which is, on the bigger picture, if we have positive findings, and this could really be quite a wonderful example of how, on a larger scale and in a more fully integrated way, museums and public school systems could work together and provide more resources into the schools and be able to achieve greater results. A true partnership concept. So it's a big study. We have a great team. We have a lot of work to do. We're serious about it. We're going to be really careful, and we're also really kind of excited. And so my last little shot here, Sarah, is just to say, we are sort of doing some things in a new way, and that it is really giving us energy. So you have an excited group of people going to work on this study, and we'll be thrilled to come back to you in September of 2023 with the findings.
Thank you so much, Mary Ellen, for sharing all of that. Yes, lots of applause. Yeah, we're very excited about these methods that we're designing and their applicability across different museums as well as school settings. I just also want to shout out the rest of our research team. We've got Kate Milazzo and Claire Tratniak, who have been indispensable in this process, and also everyone that is on this call that we've run ideas by over this course of time, which brings me to our next speaker. So Boston Public Schools, as part of us doing research in the schools, we have a sponsor in the Office of, I get it right, the Office of Academics and Professional Learning in Christine Landry. And her team has just been amazing. And we're delighted to have Sharon Abraham here as a representative. Sharon's spent 25 years in BPS as a teacher, a coach. She's now the secondary program director in the English language arts. And she's just been an incredible partner in planning for this study, pushing us into conversations that have really been instrumental, as Mary Ellen said, in making sure that this is a project that really centers the needs of Boston Public School students and their teachers. So she's going to share a little bit more about the work that's happening in BPS that this project aligns with. And we're really grateful to have you here today. So I'll turn it over to you, Sharon.
Thank you so much. That was incredibly kind. I am so happy to be here. BPS is so proud and excited to partner with the Gardner Museum on this important project. So I want to say thank you to my supervisor, Christine Landry, who is the Assistant Superintendent of Academics and Professional Learning. There's a mouthful. And she is the BPS sponsor for the study, but I also want to thank Stacy Withington, who is my elementary partner in crime, and she's here tonight because she's just the best and most awesome. And so I just needed to say that out loud, that I'm so excited that she's here. I am Sharon Abraham. I'm the 6 to 12 program director in BPS. And again, I'm just really honored to be here as a representative of BPS tonight. Everything I'm going to talk about is just to show appreciation for the Gardner Museum. To start, Sarah and Kate and the Gardner staff have demonstrated that they are extremely committed to both the collaboration and to the mutual success of their program, and first and foremost, to benefit our kids. I mean, this is for me, this is for the kids. And so thinking through art images that they've chosen have been aligned to our newly adopted Studysync curriculum, and the Gardner program staff have been supporting teachers in implementing our new curriculum. The quick version, because I will get lost in the curriculum weeds. And when I asked for notes on how to prepare for tonight, it was like, don't get lost in the weeds. So, okay, Studysync slide, please. Studysync is a grade level standards aligned, thank you, English curriculum. The units of study are divided thematically for students to be able to access multimodal texts around a particular theme and an essential question. So the Gardner just did this phenomenal work, curating enabling pieces that fit so well within the curriculum units, allowing students to access diverse cultural representation through the windows and mirrors and the sliding doors of their art choices, but also creating the experience of art as a shared and enjoyable learning opportunity. Their support and implementation of thoughtful and relevant professional development for the teachers make thinking through art an awesome addition to our newly adopted curriculum. So thank you for that. The teachers are frequently telling us about the benefits of this participation in thinking through art. So I reached out to BPS teacher Wendy Welch over at Excel High School. She's awesome. And she teaches a sub-separate population. And she said, quote, "Working with the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum has enabled my scholars to become more critical thinkers and find their voice. The lessons are such that all of my scholars have an opportunity to engage in an academic discussion that supports their social emotional needs. No one feels like they're going to give the wrong answer. In 25 years of teaching, I can honestly say that this is a program that is accessible to nearly every scholar in BPS." Equally important to her voice would be the voice of the kids. So I got her to give a quote from one of her kids, students, young people, sorry, they're all my kids. Wendy's 10th grade student Lynn says, "I believe that VTS, visual thinking strategies, is very important. It isn't wasting time looking at art, it's high schoolers getting back into learning and sharing our thoughts and feelings with one another. After COVID hit, students didn't want to engage in classroom conversations, but doing VTS helps. We get to interact more and it's fun to do. Personally, it makes me think and write better without the stress of tests and quizzes." So then, why else? Why be so excited about thinking through art study and the partnership between the Gardner and BPS? Thinking through art aligns with the district schools and our department, the ELA Literacy Department, top priorities. The curriculum work corresponds directly to the entire BPS Equitable Literacy Initiative, in which all students should be able to access all grade level material with support from teachers and from partners like the Gardner Museum. Again, the weeds, thanks for making the wheel. The components that BPS is prioritizing for at least the next 3 years are content and knowledge building, daily work with enabling and complex texts, writing and background knowledge, and language activation. Thinking through art allows for students to grapple with artwork as text in an aesthetic way, as those who can examine and appreciate art because art is emotional and empowering, but also academically and thematically, discussing the art with peers and their teachers, writing about it, truly engaging with the pieces and their learning communities. This is the goal, for students to be both truly immersed and engaged with texts of all genres and allowing more students genuine access to the art world. Students are invited to experience the joy and beauty of art while also maintaining the rigor of their grade level expectations. Furthermore, thinking through art both complements and supports the professional development led by the ELA and Literacy Office for both adopted curriculums such as Studysync and ELA around culturally and linguistically sustaining practices, equitable literacy for all BPS students, and frankly, that school should be a joyous place where teachers are facilitators of experiences and discussions alongside with their students whose ideas and brilliance are nurtured. Thinking through art will create opportunities for more students and school leaders to learn about the program, building capacity across the district, and then more students will have greater access to both art literacy and also the consistent opportunity to experience art firsthand. We are so looking forward to the continued work with the research team to ensure that this study is successful and to spread the word as much as we can about the thinking through art across the district. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you, Stacy, too. You know, oh, I went too fast to the next slide, but that gives you a preview of where we're going. But I just want to, again, thank you for this partnership and the collaboration and how much deeper we can go when we go there together. So thank you, thank you, thank you. As we see on the slide here, an event celebrating thinking through art would not ever exist without celebrating the teachers who are part of thinking through art. And tonight we're going to give a special shout out to the 4 teachers who are part of our research advisory group. So these are the folks that, as Mary Ellen said, are going to be giving us feedback on tools and pilot testing and just sharing their vast expertise with us for the rest of this school year. So none of this would be possible without them. They've already given us so many ideas. And these are all teachers who are part of our Thinking Through Art Level 2 program. So teachers that really find resonance with Thinking Through Art are able to continue learning with us through joining Level 2, where they get to really integrate Thinking Through Art concepts into their curriculum and design their own projects. So just briefly, and they're all here joining us today, so maybe they can like wave or say hi as I name them. So Mike Berger teaches computer programming as a vocation at Madison Park Technical Vocational High School. And Mike, do you want to wave and say hello? There he is, great. Then we've got Jen Dines, who's the Director of English Language Learning and an ESL teacher at the Lila G. Frederick Pilot Middle School, and has been a Thinking Through Art teacher for 4 out of the 5 years that it has existed. So Jen, we are very excited to be working with you. Oh, Jen had to leave early. Sorry, she said hello. You know, lots of little ones at home. So we appreciate Jen very much. Chelsea Ruscio is an ESL and special education teacher now at the Dudley Street Neighborhood Charter School. And they shared with me that they have a longstanding love of the Gardner Museum and have cherished getting to work alongside museum educators for these past 2 years in Thinking Through Art. So hi, Chelsea, good to see you. And Perla Vitella is currently teaching English to recently immigrated high school students in Boston at the Boston International Newcomers Academy, or BINCA. And she's enjoyed teaching and working with this population for the last 8 years and has been given us so many ideas about working with newcomers. So great to see you too, Perla. And you all got to hear a little bit from them during the VTS discussion. They were some of our most active participants. And if anyone wanted to ask them questions, we'll have time for that in just a moment. But I want to take a moment. We said in the invite to bring a beverage. I still am drinking coffee. If you have a beverage of any sort with you, even imaginary, please raise a glass to these incredible teachers and all the other teachers that they represent. The work that you do is amazing and it's been so hard over these last few years, but you have created these moments of beauty and joy for your students and sparked their imaginations and brought them to new worlds and just gave them all of the tools and the motivation to carry on despite the most challenging circumstances. Thank you to our teachers. Okay. So we're nearing the end of our time together this evening, and we wanted to create space to turn it over to you. You know, as I look at these little boxes on my Zoom, the brain power in this Zoom room is astounding. So this is the moment where we turn it over to you. If this study is successful, what do you hope to learn? How would you use that learning? What should we keep in mind so that this is a useful study? What might we be missing? What are our blind spots? What questions do you have for anyone that was speaking tonight, for anyone on the team about this study and how we'll use the findings? So you can certainly put things in the chat or we can go back to the raised hand, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can really have a moment to talk about all of the information that we just threw at you and to give a chance for reactions and questions. Perla, please kick us off.
This year, I haven't done as many VTS conversations, but I will get to them. But one of the reasons is I don't want to, the images aren't necessarily on the same theme as whatever we're doing in class. So that's just something that I want to mention is I would love it if there were images kind of organized in certain themes or topics, or that would allow me that flexibility to find my own that could be used, that we write up our reports on, right? Because I could always pull up an image or criteria to keep in mind as I select an image, so that it's easier to throw an image in there and have it kind of be applicable or useful for VTS conversation through the museum.
Thank you. So, we've always, for the time that we've been using VTS, we've really avoided aligning the images with curriculum explicitly because of wanting to keep students' responses as open as possible and not try to have a predetermined, end point. As Stacy was sharing, as Sharon was sharing, we have this year looked at the units in Studysync, which have very similar themes as the thematic ties that bind together the different images that are in our Thinking Through Art curriculum. So this is our first foray into aligning with the curriculum, but along that thematic lens. And we can certainly work with you, if it's Studysync or something like that, to think about how we can extend that into the upper grades as well. Currently, we've started that alignment in middle school. So yes, we can talk more about that.
Yeah, thank you. I did think about that. Then I'm like, well, on the other hand, my newcomers are studying this topic and they have all this rich vocab for this content. Like, why not give them those images? So I know it's hard to balance. Thank you.
Any other questions or responses? Peggy. You're on mute. Peggy, you're muted. We can't hear you.
That's all right. I was just just saying how excited I am that this is happening, and you're going to find out some really interesting things. So I have two questions. One is whether or why you made the decision to use brand new teachers and not the teachers that you've already trained. And then of course I have a second question, which is about really when you're thinking about critical thinking skills, what are the different ways in which you're framing that, if that's something that you've already started to do. So
sure. Yeah, I can take the first part of that and then I'll turn it over to Mary Ellen on the critical thinking piece. So we are working, first of all, our sample size of teachers that are in level 1 of Thinking Through Art is significantly larger than the group of teachers that continue on with us for level 2, especially in this COVID era where people don't always know what's going to come, what the year is going to throw at them. So we wanted to make sure that the sample size of students especially was as representative of Boston Public Schools as possible. So casting that wider net by working with all of the teachers that are in Thinking Through Art next year as our group. It's also one of the things that distinguishes this study from previous studies is we're not trying to test the validity of visual thinking strategies as a methodology. That has been rigorously studied and been found to be very successful. So again, thank you, Philip, thank you, Harry, thank you others on this call. This is really looking at how is the program Thinking Through Art, how well are we achieving those Boston Public School goals? So one of the things that we need to keep in mind there is as we're training these new teachers, how well are we preparing them to achieve culturally and linguistically sustaining practices in their classroom from that first year, right? That can't wait till year 2. So I hope that helps to answer that question. Yeah. And then Mary Ellen, I'll turn to you for the critical thinking.
The process that we're going through and thinking about how to look at critical thinking is that we're defining critical thinking in terms of the aspects of critical thinking that are taught in the Thinking Through Art program, right? So it's a program that very much puts its focus on how do you sort of take some time and find information So you're just observing, so finding information. And then it's also one where, you know, students are asked to describe what they're seeing, but then to, you know, attach it to some kind of evidence that they're looking at. So that notion of drawing inferences and doing it based on information and on evidence. The other thing that thinking through arts does so well is it allows for the possibility of a student being able to find associations between what he or she already knows and what they've experienced in their own lives to to learning in the classroom. And so that's why we're looking at that, where they're finding those associations. And then this is also just by the nature of the model of the instruction. It's something that focuses and builds the capacity for accepting and even seeking out multiple perspectives, that you're not just depending on what you by yourself can see or make sense of. And then, excuse me, finally, that we've added reasoning as one of the things that thinking through the arts can help with. And that's not been a feature of some of the previous studies, but what we're doing with that is we're looking to see if we can investigate sort of how students can synthesize the information that they've taken in from the image itself and from the conversations with others, and can they craft you know, a caption or a story. We're still figuring out what that exact prompt is going to be. But what does that do in terms of the richness of their reasoning? When we look at the differences between at the beginning of the school year, at the end of the school year, and as we look at the differences between the students and teachers who are doing TTA and the ones who are in the control group. So that identifying information, making associations, being able to draw inferences, to be able to consider multiple perspectives, and to be able to reason are the ways that we're looking at critical thinking, because it's what's being taught. So like, it's kind of nice to assess what's being taught, right? Not assessing something that was never taught to begin with. So that's been our thinking: define something by what's being taught, and then use that as your way to assess what's going on.
And I see Perla in the chat asking whether there will be anything explicitly taught to the students as part of the pilot. I think maybe the best way to answer that is, as Mary Ellen was discussing, in the prompt that we have students respond to when they're looking at a work of art. Our current plan, and you will be one of the people piloting this, is to give them all of the visual thinking strategies questions as their prompt. So in previous studies, we've just asked what's going on in this picture and allowed students to respond in any way that they choose, and really looking at whether they had internalized those prompts. So here we'll be actually putting those questions in front of them to see, with that prompting, how are they performing. And across all of these different choices, you know, just to reiterate, we're making these choices because we want to get the fullest representation possible of all of the richness and depth that students have when they're talking about a work of art. So when we're talking about different ways of collecting that data, when we're talking about adding some of those additional scaffolds, it's because we want to do as much as we can to make sure that students can convey as much thinking as possible in terms of the way that they're experiencing this program and experiencing the artworks. Did you want to add to that, Perla, or respond to that?
Yeah, I was just curious, like, for example, the making inferences, will that be explicitly taught besides giving them the 2 questions? That's just one example.
Well, as we look at the process of the visual thinking strategy, that whole process of being able to describe something that you're seeing or something that, and then being able to provide the evidence for that is part of what people do when they draw inferences. So that's where we're sort of making that connection. It's a type of teaching about inferences, whereas because you're asking students, and what makes you say that, and practicing, going back and looking for information and evidence.
Yeah, I see Philip's hand is raised.
Well, a little bit of history. There were two questions that were instigated the VTS conversations early on. One was, what do you see? And the other was, what's going on in this picture? And what do you see does the thing, Perla, that you first identified, sort of, it means finding things. You make observations. It's very simple. And it's finding information. But we abandoned that because it was too easy for most people beyond maybe preschool. But what's going on in this picture asks for inferences. It's another way of saying, what does this mean to you? What does this tell you? And as soon as you pull back from an observation to think about what it adds up to, what it tells you, what meaning you can draw from it, you're making an inference. So it's not said to them in so many words, make an inference, but it's nevertheless perfectly easy to find them in their writing samples as well as in their conversations. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you. Yeah, and I see Perla putting in the chat about additional scaffolding to support that skill development as well. Thank you. Any other questions or responses?
What is, sorry, I should have raised my hand.
Go ahead, Mike.
What are you hoping to find from both the museum's perspective and as a PI? What would be information you'd get that would really help, not necessarily prove VTS, but just, really help move the museum and the research forward?
This is a somewhat simplistic answer, but what I would hope is that we are successful in gathering some information about the impact of this way of doing instruction and learning that's believable and that's desirable. So can we describe it in a way and research it in a way that makes it matter to people in the Boston Public Schools? And are we doing it in a way that makes it believable, right? So, best case scenario, we provide some evidence about why this may well be something that schools would adopt.
Yeah, and just to add, I think that really nails it, that it's about how can we demonstrate impact so that we can increase access really to additional teacher colleagues of yours who might not think, oh, I'm going to sign up for Thinking Through Art, but really it could benefit them and their students. So having some data behind that. And then personally, I'm fascinated by this social emotional development component of it, because we've been hearing from all of you and we've all experienced that there's so much that happens for us as human beings during a VTS discussion. But at the Gardner Museum, we've focused more so on the critical thinking in the past. And we know that, you need to measure something to be able to really see it, right? And to prioritize it. So I'm, especially as we hopefully come out of COVID, but in this time, I really am excited about that and having some data around the social emotional components. I see a lot of nodding, so I see you're all along with us. I want to recognize the time and that a bunch of people are having to drop off. So I think that we've answered a lot of the questions that have come up, but please feel free to be in touch. I'll put my information in the chat. Feel free to be in touch with me or others on our team. And we will definitely be in touch with you to give you updates as we progress through the different phases of this study, and especially as we start to have findings to share with you and your stakeholders. We are so grateful for you all making the time to join us tonight and to be part of this very first moment of this exciting project. And I want us to one more time raise a glass to toast to this impact study, to toast to collecting data in a COVID world, and to continuing the conversation with all of you and with all of the people that you represent. I see in the chat people talking about the inspiring nature of this kind of work, and truly it is having these moments where we're able to come together and remember the core reasons that we do this work together. So to partnerships, to Boston, to museums, and all that it entails. Thank you all so very much. Have a wonderful evening, and I hope to see you all soon.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you, thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, Emily.
It sounds so great.
Hi, Emily.
I know, Rebecca. Hi. I know. Hi.